You can add crochet to just about anything. I'm thinking towels, pillowcases, jeans, skirts, other types of clothing, the collars of your shirts, placemats, napkins. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's one of my favorite ways to make a store-bought item feel special and unique. You can add a pop of color, you can dress it up a little bit, you can save something from the donation pile, or even dress up something that you bought from the thrift store. If you've been crocheting for any amount of time, you've got some hooks, you've got some yarn, you've got a yarn needle, well, you have what it takes to add a little bit of crochet to whatever it is that you want to dress up or make feel special. Now, one of my favorite first projects is just a towel. Like, just get a cotton, like 100% cotton. I think these are sometimes called tea towels or something like that. And I picked up this set, I believe, from Hobby Lobby like some time ago. Always wanting to do something. I honestly wanted to do a little bit of embroidery on the bottom and add a crochet border, which is exactly what we did. Something like this is really, really easy to poke your needle through, and that's exactly what you need for this technique. We'll go into more of that later, but that's the first thing to keep in mind. The other is that something like this, and actually a lot of items that you might try this on, have a seam or like a hem at the bottom, and that gives you like the perfect guideline to making your stitches. These are called blanket stitches, and I'll show you how to add these to your fabric so that you can crochet on it just like this. And yeah, I'll show you how to do this stitch and everything. But if a hand towel sounds like still a little bit too big of an investment to try something for the first time, along the same lines, you can either pick up, or perhaps you have some of these just reusable cotton napkins. These are really, really great for adding crochet to, and obviously it's much smaller than like a hand towel. So these have the same benefits as the other, like the hand towel, because it's the same material. It's really easy to poke your needle through. And of course we've got the hem here at the bottom, so we have our like sort of guideline for our stitches. But even better, a pattern like this that's striped also makes it really easy to space your stitches. So those are just a couple of little things that you'll come across as you try it that you realize later on are like added bonuses for these types of materials, but you don't have to have these types of materials. That's kind of the fun of this. You can add crochet to literally anything that you can get your needle through. Another thing I've been wanting to try is adding crochet to the pocket of a pair of old jeans. These are actually old jean shorts. And this is even less of an investment time-wise than like a towel or a napkin, because you're just working on like a few inch or like a 4-inch kind of section here. You still have the seam kind of guiding you along the way. And how adorable would it be to just have a little pair of shorts, like have a pocket that's got some crochet on it? I mean, it's super cute and fun. A couple more things that come to mind are baby items. If you're maybe going to a baby shower or having a baby of your own, then yeah, I mean, there's really nothing like having an heirloom that maybe you don't use every single day, but you definitely want to have something to hold on to. Then this could be a really great opportunity. If you don't have time to, say, crochet a whole blanket or something like that, you can buy a really pretty blanket and add some crochet edging around it. And bonus points, if you're using a yarn that's washable and dryable, then the blanket can still actually be used on a regular basis. I think it could also be really cute around maybe a bib or something like that. I think for that to be practical, you would have to pick a yarn that is washer and dryer friendly, so that way the mom can wash it as often as she needs to. But yeah, just think little items like that for baby, you could totally add some crochet to. And the other thing that comes to mind that actually really stands out the most in my mind, because I just have a lot of childhood memories associated with it. My grandma was just a very skilled crocheter and embroiderer, and she just did all types of beautiful crafts. And I remember we had several pillowcases growing up that had hand embroidery kind of like on the edge or like the cuff, like the opening. And not only that, it had a crochet border around it. And we used these pillowcases all the time. They got washed all the time, so she made them very, very well. And I so wish I had one of those to show you because I remember them being absolutely gorgeous. And so something like that, that has a lot of meaning behind it, that the person that you're gifting it to can cherish it for that many years. I mean, this is just one of those techniques that I think is super cool and fun for you, but also very meaningful for somebody else. This is what you'll need to get started. So obviously you'll need your item that you want to crochet onto. I'm going to use one of those little napkins just to show you how a few stitches are done. You'll need some yarn, and for this I typically prefer something a little bit thinner. This is a DK weight, I believe. Yeah. So this is a lightweight or a DK weight yarn. This is also a cotton yarn, cotton blend, but it is washer dryer friendly. So I do like to use this for items that I know I'm going to add crochet to that will be washed, because yeah, this can easily be thrown in the washer as well. But you know, you don't have to have this yarn. If this isn't something that you have in your stash, don't worry. Any type of cotton yarn I personally like to use the most, because cotton is very durable and it's usually very washer dryer friendly. But if you're adding it to an item that you know won't get used very or washed very much, then you could totally go with maybe a wool yarn or a wool blend or an acrylic or something like that. Just sort of use your discretion. Use the supplies and the yarn that you have on hand. Make sure you read the labels so you know how to care for it, and make sure those care instructions coordinate with the item that you're adding it to. So you'll also obviously need some scissors and a crochet hook. The crochet hook size should coordinate with the yarn that you're using. I'm using a 4.5 millimeter for this yarn. I think that's a pretty good combination. It gives me a nice drape that I like, but play around with it or use whichever hook size you know to be best with the yarn that you're using. And probably the most important thing here is the needle. So this is just a darning needle or yarn needle that came with my Tulip Edimo crochet hooks. And you don't have to have these crochet hooks to buy this particular needle, but the idea is to have a needle that's fairly small. So I wouldn't choose any of these needle options because the needle has to fit through the material. So for these cotton kind of towels, the needle will go just straight in, and it does leave a minimal hole, but it usually repairs itself quite well. So that's kind of the stipulation for the needle. It needs to be sharp enough and small enough that it will go through the fabric with no real effort put into it. You don't want to damage the fabric, and here we're just kind of spreading open the woven part of this fabric. So this one works perfectly. These, however, are obviously quite a bit thicker, and so they will not go through. I mean, I could force it through and it will work, but it leaves a big hole. Like, let's see. See how it leaves a big giant hole? We just want to try to avoid that. Like I said, this yarn or this fabric really repairs itself well, so it works out. But it's also thicker down here than it is up here, and so that makes a big difference. But I think there will be situations where you might need an even smaller needle or an even pointier needle. So I am currently on the hunt for a needle that will go through multiple layers of fabrics, because my mom and I have come up with this kind of like collaboration project, and I need a smaller needle for this. So my mom is a really excellent quilter. She makes some of the most beautiful quilts, and she thought it would be really cool if she would make some quilted squares and I would crochet them together. So these squares have 2 fabrics to it, and it also has the quilt lining or the stuff that's inside. So if I were to use this needle, it really doesn't want to go through. Again, it's one of the situations where I could definitely force it, but I don't want to put a bunch of holes in it. I don't want to, ruin this or anything like that. So I do know that I need a smaller needle. So for something like this or other fabrics that maybe your yarn needle won't go through, you'll have to look for something that has a pointier tip to it, which generally isn't hard to find. It's very easy to find needles that you can use for hand sewing, but the hard part is finding an eye that's big enough for your yarn to go through. And the other thing too is you want the yarn to not be so thick that it can also go through the layers without, distorting or messing up the fabrics. So those are just a couple of things to think about and to keep in mind as you're planning your projects like this. None of it is impossible with the right tools. But since you probably have a small yarn needle like this floating around somewhere, and you've definitely got some type of fabric that you could experiment with, I wanted to take the time to show you 2 different ways that you can start sort of like your foundation for crocheting on fabric. So first up, you'll need a cut of yarn, of course. And honestly, for this, I would say work on a small section first just to get the hang of the stitch, and then maybe try adding another section. And the reason why I say that is, at least for this stitch, the blanket stitch that I'm going to show you how to do, it's not difficult to add more yarn to. It's certainly doable, but it's kind of finicky and annoying when you're trying to learn the stitch in the first place. So I would say get you a cut of yarn that you're comfortable with working with and add that to your yarn needle, and just know going into it that we're just practicing a few stitches. And I'm just going to start here in the middle. And I want the tail to be on the underside so that we can weave that in just to our regular like crochet stitches after the fact. So I will come in, and I'm just going to do so right up next to this seam because it makes my life easy. I can just know that every single one of my blanket stitches will be the same height if I stay along this border. So we'll just poke it through, pull it all the way down, and leave yourself a tail that you would normally leave to weave in at the end. And so this is just the starting of that stitch. It's a little bit different to start it than it is to actually crochet it, or not crochet it, but you know what I mean. Keep going with it. So you'll take your needle and you'll go right down into the same spot where you started, kind of reversing, or going from back to front again. And before you pull that loop all the way through, take your yarn needle and run it through the loop. Pull that through, and then sort of pull that tight. You don't want to pull it so tight that it like scrunches your fabric up, but tight enough that it sits nicely along the edge. And we're ready for the first real stitch. So that just sort of gets it attached. It looks pretty neat and tidy on the front side and pretty good on the back side as well. So since I have this striped pattern here, I'm just going to use this to my advantage and make the stitches as wide as the stripes. But you can make them as wide as you want. I typically find that I probably wouldn't make them any thinner than this, because I typically find that using a spacing that allows you to put 2 single crochets through is pretty comfortable. I think for something like this, it would probably only fit 1 single crochet, but that's just something to keep in mind. The more crochet stitches you have and the further the blanket stitches are apart, the more, we'll say, gappy it's going to be. So let me pull this in really quick. See how there's a little bit of space between them? I've got 2 single crochets that are placed between the blanket stitches, and it still sits up nice with the fabric. But if you get them to be too wide, you've got more stitches, it might not hang the same. So just something to keep in mind as you're spacing these apart. So you'll go through from front to back, and we will pull this all the way through, almost all the way through. And I tend to just sort of catch it on my finger there so I don't pull it all the way through. and then I'll run the yarn needle through the loop and then just sort of pull up on that. So there we go, and that's as complicated as this blanket stitch gets. I'll take my yarn needle, run it into or from front to back, hold on to, the part that's attached to the work, get my little loop, run it through, and that's it. Pull it kind of tight. And again, not super tight, but tight enough. Yeah, I think this spacing is definitely good for one single crochet. So something to keep in mind. If you know that you're wanting the crochet bit to it, the edging, to be right up next to the fabric, you might want to go with a narrower placement of these stitches. And if you're looking for, like a totally lacy look, you might space them out a little bit. Now, I'll be honest, I usually find that I am much quicker and more proficient with this stitch if I am not crocheting or not making these stitches on a table out in front of me like I'm using to show you. Typically, you'll find me sitting just like this with kind of the work up a little bit closer to my face so I can see where my needle placement is, but I always still sort of catch the loop with my finger and run it through. Another little shortcut you can do is take your tail and you can basically double it up almost all the way to your project, and that way you're pulling on it less. You know what I mean? Like, as you're pulling it through, you're not, cranking over and over and over, and yeah, it's just a little bit quicker and easier. Now, let's say you do what I just did and you pull it too tight and you lose your loop. If that's the case, don't worry. Just grab that little bit that's at the back there, pull it up, and you've got your loop back. And you can just run the yarn right through it. Another thing to keep in mind as you're adding your blanket stitches, or later on we'll show you the chain stitch to your fabrics, the thing to keep in mind is the multiple of stitches that you're using in the crochet part of your edging. If you know that it's a fairly simple stitch pattern, maybe it doesn't have a repeat or a multiple rather at all, and you can use any number of stitches. Well, if that's the case, then you don't really have to do much pre-planning, and those are kind of the best borders to start with. Or you could even try something that's maybe a little bit more difficult, we'll say, not even difficult, but let's say perhaps you're using a stitch with a multiple that's an even number or an odd number. Those are really great to work with as well, because you're just working with even or odd. It's not super specific where you have to say, okay, I need 8 stitches for this multiple, and those borders are definitely possible, but they just require a little bit more pre-planning ahead of time. So back to our blanket stitch here. This is what it'll look like after you get several stitches, and again, these are sort of spaced fairly close just because I wanted to use these stripes as my guideline. And that's really all you would need to do if you're adding it to a straight line. So take your needle, run it through just like you were starting your next stitch, but this is where I want the corner to be. So I'll run it through just like before. So then you'll take your needle, run it through the loop just like before, and you make that stitch. Now we need a corner stitch that's going to be placed right here. So to do that, you'll run the needle through the same place that you did before, run it through the loop, but this time just make sure the loop is sitting on the corner. So just like that. And now I've lost my grid here, but we can sort of eyeball it. It's probably about the right distance. Come through to make the next stitch, loop it through the loop, and there we go. So we've got our corner made. And you would just continue on with your regular blanket stitch. Now if you don't have a straight pattern, like I don't here along the edge, another little trick that I will use if I can see them is on these hems, you always have stitches, you know, sewing machine stitches. You can count those and say, like, maybe you'll add a blanket stitch every third sewing machine stitch. So that's one little way that you can sort of get around it. I've also seen people actually make grid lines. So you can definitely get this structured and organized with it and add a grid to your fabric so that your stitches are exactly the right length and width apart, but you don't have to. The part of the charm of this is that it's handmade and hand done, and it doesn't look exactly perfect. So when you get to the point where you're ready to end your blanket stitch, it's really easy to fasten this off. So I'll usually just hold the tail up and run the needle through like both of the strands of yarn. So I've sort of just ran it through the loop and this one here, and pull that through and run it under the tail. And that will finish it off and kind of tie it. So that's how you would use the blanket stitch to add crochet or add that foundation so that you can crochet on anything that you want in your house. The blanket stitch has a lot of charm to it. It's certainly one of the more popular, I would say, ways of adding sort of a foundation that you can crochet on. It's also used in sewing, like not even crochet related. It just works really well for something like this. But it's not the only way that you can add a foundation that you can crochet onto with your fabrics or whatever it is that you want to add crochet to. Another one of those techniques is called the chain stitch. And so I've started another napkin here, and this is what the chain stitch looks like. So this is what it looks like on the back side. We've got just a little bit more, you know, stitching here on the back than what you can see on the front. And this would be a really great use for those instances where you don't want the little blanket stitches to show or to be part of the design. So you can sort of see the difference in the two here, where we've got this added little detail of the lines from the blanket stitch, and we don't have that here. So here's how you do the chain stitch. Going back to our original napkin here, you'll still just cut a piece of yarn that's manageable to work with. With this one, with the chain stitch, I found that you don't need nearly as much yarn in your foundation as you do the blanket stitch. So for this one, I usually just, you know, make sure it's, you know, 3 or 4 times wider than what I actually want it to be in the long run. So if you're familiar with how to do the chain stitch in embroidery, you're not doing anything different necessarily, but it looks and feels a little bit different because we're doing it on the edge of a piece of fabric instead of on top like you would normally do with embroidery. So to do that and to get it started, I will usually figure out where I want my stitch to be and sort of come down a little bit in the hem, or like just a little bit towards the bottom, and poke my needle right up through the top edge, or like the middle edge of the fabric. So you can pull that through. Again, I'm going back to front, so that way I can keep the tail along the back side and weave it in a little bit later. And then I will come down through the same place. So just basically right next to the yarn on the top and right out the side where it is sort of on the bottom. And you want to hold on to this because you don't want to pull it all the way through because you'll just undo the stitch. And then you'll take your needle 1 stitch width, we'll say, apart. I'm going to make these a little bit bigger, I think, than the stripes this time. So again, run it in through sort of like the middle of the hem and out the top section, and loop it around the loop there. Loop it through the loop, if that makes any sense at all. and you'll pull up on that. It's usually my strategy. I don't want to pull this too tight again that it sort of like puckers the fabric, but we want it tight enough that there's not like a super huge gap there. So then you'll take your needle down through the stitch where you came up, or like through the placement, and out where the needle went through initially. So in through this hole right next to the yarn coming out, and poke it right out through next to this one here. And again, we don't want to pull this all the way through, so I will usually just try to stick my finger in there so that I catch it on my finger. And then make it one stitch width apart, sort of going in through the middle and out the top and through the loop. Don't worry if your head's spinning a little bit right now. It takes a minute to get used to setting this one up, but it is really quite simple once you get the hang of it. So we've got our little chain stitch there. Now remember, we go in from top out through the back. So in through where the yarn is coming out currently, and out right next to that loop there. It doesn't have to be exact, it doesn't have to be in the exact same hole, but in the same general place. My yarn is sticking to itself a little bit here. There we go. Again, don't pull that loop all the way through. Sometimes you'll add a little bit of twist as you're making these stitches along the edge. So I do try to make sure I don't have the loop twisted. Like, see how it wants to sort of twist like this? I do want to make sure it is untwisted, because it'll just make it look a little bit neater. At the end of the day, these stitches are going to be covered up with crochet stitches. And so if they're not perfect, they really don't have to be. So I wouldn't be too critical of your work and of what you're doing, because they will be somewhat hidden. But, you know, just something to keep in mind. The twist could make the stitch a little bit tighter, and that could maybe affect the way that it looks, like when you've added the crochet stitch to them. So if you have a corner to work around like I do for this one, it's still really simple to add a corner to your chain stitch here. So again, on this last stitch, I have a little bit of space, and I will still work down through the top and out the back, just like I'm working a normal stitch. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I would just rotate it, and in the next stitch placement, or the next area where I want the stitch, which is usually just a little bit over from the corner, I'll run it through just like before. This is a little bit thicker and a little harder to get the needle through, just because I'm working on so many layers of fabric here. It's really hard to get the needle through just one, but still totally possible. And that way it sort of lays the chain over top of the corner. And you can treat that just like a regular crochet corner. Like you might do a single crochet, a chain two, and a single crochet, or whatever your corner pattern happens to be. And you've got that placed just right there, so you can do that really easily. And then you just continue with your regular repeat. Again, I'm fighting the fabric a tiny bit here because it's kind of thick, but totally doable, and usually only a thing along the corners. Also doesn't help that I have lotion on my fingers, and my fingers are a little bit slippery. So yeah, from there you would just continue on with your chain pattern here until you're ready to fasten off. And the way you do that is also very easy. So what I would do to fasten this off, instead of going in through the bottom here, like we were adding a new stitch, I will go in just right next to the loop right there and out the back. So I'm catching this loop, and I'll also run this through so we have somewhat of a little knot there. Pull that nice and tight, and there, it's nice and secure. So then you can trim your tail and weave that in to the crochet work on the back. So those are two ways that you can sort of add a foundation of yarn to your fabric or whatever it is that you want to crochet to. And it, breaks things up a little bit. You get to use a yarn needle, get to practice some embroidery stitches, maybe learn a new technique. And I think it's really a lot of fun. But if you're not interested in that look, that style, or just learning how to do those techniques, I totally get it. There are still ways that you can crochet on fabrics or anything that you can find with a couple of extra tools. One of the things that comes to mind is a rotary cutter. Again, this is a tool that you would use for quilting typically, and it's basically a round blade that cuts in like predetermined increments. Now, I personally don't have one of these because I usually like to use one of these other methods, but I know that it works, and I know that it's a really quick and easy way to do it. So think about what you have around your house, maybe what tools you have from other crafts that you like to use or to do. And basically, if you have something that has a hole in it, you can easily add crochet to that thing by creating those holes and using those holes as just like a regular stitch to work your hook into. Now you might be wondering about the crochet edging and okay, what do I do now? What edging do I use for the thing that I'm adding this crochet to? And the answer is anything you want. And that's the fun part about this technique. You can make up your own stitch pattern. You can do your own thing. You can do something super simple, like just a row of single crochets and then maybe like a row of picot stitches on the edge of that. You have no multiple to worry about there. But for those more custom pieces, for the blankets or the clothing that you have your eye on that you want to add this to, maybe baskets or whatever, then you might look into other types of border patterns. And these border patterns aren't specific to an actual object, like a specific object, like a scarf or a collar on a shirt. I mean, sure, you might find some patterns out there for items like that. You could check on Ravelry or Pinterest. But honestly, looking up border patterns is probably your best bet. You can probably find quite a few on the internet just for free. But there are also tons of border books out there that will give you the full stitch pattern, usually even some diagrams included, of borders that you could potentially use for these objects. There's really so much you can do with this technique, and that's why I'm just absolutely loving it. So if you do give this a try, tell me what you're going to edge in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your ideas because I'm just in an edging mood. I'm kind of edging everything at the moment and having a ton of fun doing it. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.